Good day. In this video, I'd like to share with you how do I predict high versus low performing candidates in job interviews. The first test to take into account is on whether a candidate is coachable or not. Okay, someone who's not coachable is far more likely to repeat the same mistakes, during subsequent sessions. Such as, for example, if you determine that the conflict might not be something appropriate to talk about during a job interview, the next time I ask them the same question, they would repeat the same answer, But this is the simplest possible example I could give. Someone who's not coachable also is likely to be more on the defensive, when I have an argument, I say, hey, candidate, you do a mistake, you're not right here. They would rather stay on the defensive all the time and keep their point of view versus someone who's likely to learn, whether they agree or not, that's another thing, but they would like to understand the other person's point of view and, have an overall more of a growth mindset. Learners tend to be also high performers for this purpose and, coachable candidates. Okay, the second thing I'd like to talk about here would be with respect to interview prep patterns. Okay, and basically a low performer is likely to have a very short attention span. You cannot focus at length. For example, if a training video is 10 minutes, a low performer will do 25% or 30% of the day and they would lose their attention. Okay, also another indication of low versus high performer candidates is consistency. Okay, perfection is not something you have to be a genius, but rather you have to be consistent. You have to persist in whatever you do. So consistency is also something interesting to track for this purpose. High performers use AI for entertainment, and low performers use AI because they're looking for someone to lead them through the interview prep process, right? So this would also be a very interesting sign, a very interesting prep pattern when it comes on this topic. The third comparison I believe makes a ton of sense here would be that low performers are far more likely to try to fit, into, into a company's culture, or, to fit by templating all their answers in the STAR format because they think that's a must have for job interview, or you must include at least one metric in your answers, or you must be as concise as possible and keep all your answers short, right? Versus the high performers where, they prioritize very much thinking on their feet and, making decisions on what's best for them, what type of individual they are, their core values, and trying to blend that in the company's principles. STAR format is a good one, but it's not the best one. And, metrics are good, but if you overdo the metrics, then, it's not going to end up well. And these sort of things. Okay. The fourth comparison I'd like to make here would be with respect to specificity. It's always the high-performing candidates who end up with specific examples from their past experiences that predict their superior performance on the job, right? A weak candidate will very much be tempted to answer a hypothetical question. How would you lead your team with a hypothetical answer, and that's it. A high performer will maybe have an introduction about how their theory of leading, if that makes sense for the role that you're applying for, but at the end of the day they will always link that with the specific experiences they had of leadership, that would recommend them as the best candidate for the job. And this is super important to understand because if you would take advice of examples, hey, what's the best way to answer interview questions, more often than not, they will be more generic. They would give you, hey, you would go something like this, and people look literally at that example and give generic answers versus hands-on specific ones. Okay, and when I say hands-on, I really mean it. Even for director level roles are not hands-on roles, but they give specific examples. This is quite an important one. And finally, the fifth comparison I like to make here, a very interesting one probably for some of you, would be that you could read low performance like an open book. during job interviews. Whereas whenever I coach someone, it's oftentimes a little bit the opposite. Like you feel like they can also read you quite well, and even better than you can read them. Okay, so it boils down to listening skills. So listening skills is something super important, and again, try to read the room and be less readable if you can, right? But listening skills and reading your interviewer's thoughts are also an indication of high-performing candidates in job interviews. So I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.